I'm so glad we had the opportunity to hear the story of Hotelicopter first, because that story really encompasses, in my view, the E in the middle. It's the combination of innovation and effectuation. Some of you may be familiar with the concept of effectuation, what it means to effectuate. You'll hear more about that later. But right now, we'll start over on this end to talk about the innovate part of this equation, and that's what our guests are here to do. My name is Sean Carr. I'm with the Batten Institute. I'm the Director of Intellectual Capital. So the things that I think about are big ideas. So hopefully we'll get into a little bit of that today. I'll start at this end. I'd like to introduce my colleague, Professor Jeanne Liedtka from here at the Darden School in the strategy area, but who is also one of the leading thinkers on the subject of design thinking, and the uses of design thinking for driving growth and innovation within organizations. I will introduce Mark Miller, our guest, who joins us from San Francisco. He is the CEO of MK Think. It is a consultancy, design, strategy, and innovation consultancy, and I'll let you sort of elaborate further on that. And he is also the director of a new venture within it called the Innovation Studio. Later, you will also, for those of you who stay, he'll be participating in the clean tech panel and talk about very specifically something called Project Frog. We probably won't get into that much right now. I'm sure we'll get into more of your backgrounds in a moment, but I thought, this whole event, and all of you are here because we're here to talk about, well, it's Entrepreneurship Conference, and that, I think, to many of us feels very tangible, very grounded, as you heard from the story of Hotelicopter. It's about starting the business. But there's some missing pieces in there, I feel. And that concept of innovation, to many people, feels rather fuzzy. You might have heard the term, the fuzzy front end of innovation. Do you think that's right? Is that the right way to look at innovation, as this very fuzzy concept? Mark?
Yes and no. There is the shower part of the innovation. I mean, you are in the place that makes you work well and think well, where ideas happen, and they can come from anywhere and any time. And being in the profession of innovation now, that's absolutely true. But that element, that piece, only happens, at least for us, on a basis of, we're actually quite logical innovators. We have a process and methodologies which enable the fast part of the brain, the slow part of the brain, individual thinking and team thinking to happen and to mature, and to, for us, provide a research foundation that enables the sparks to happen that we then run with. So I think it's a combination of both. One doesn't work without the other. You can't logically come up with innovation on its own. You have to allow the brain to be free. But it's not, for us at least, it's not an entirely unstructured activity either. What we try to do is provide a framework where it can happen from multiple places in a logical way.
What do you think, Jim?
Well, and for me, I spend most of my time working with large business organizations around the innovation space. As a matter of fact, I try never to talk to entrepreneurs. So it's only the fact that I work for these guys that would get me here. Because what I find with entrepreneurs is, we make all the pronouncements of all the research we've done and the books we've written about, how to be a growth leader and how to innovate and stuff. And when you're talking to entrepreneurs, they kind of look at you and say, and someone paid you to come up with that? Right? It seems so obvious, a lot of it. We were talking about small bets. It's one of our big breakthroughs. Place small bets. And entrepreneurs are okay, why would anyone want to place a big bet if you could place a small one? Right? But in large business organizations, we have made the fuzzy front end incredibly fuzzy and incredibly risky, and taken what I think for people with a natural inclination towards innovation and growth, what is a pretty kind of natural act, and by trying to control it and process it and stage gate it and all of the kind of things we do in large business organizations, we've made it unnatural, and we've made it something that scares managers and just seems very threatening to them. When in fact, to Mark's point, it is something that can be systematized, and we can all get better at it. And yes, no matter how much we all study innovation, we will never be Steve Jobs, many of us, right? There are clearly people with just incredible gifts in that area, But the reality of it is all of us can be good enough to be a lot more successful at innovation than we are today. But we need to break away from some of the constraints that large organizations in particular place on their people when they ask them to do this.
That's interesting. This notion of sort of innovation in large organizations and innovation that may occur in entrepreneurial settings, in my mind raises the question of resources. I think anyone who's starting a business right now, and Adam and Charles are good examples of people who've done this, they could say, well, 3M, sure, they could innovate. I mean, it's huge. They have infrastructure, they have resources, they have lots of funding to make things happen. But as we heard from Adam and Charles, they couldn't spend $9 million on a new web platform. They had to scale it differently. How much do resources matter in terms of achieving innovative breakthroughs, whether you're in a large organization or a small one?
For us, I think the key to innovation is just not enough resources is the right amount. I mean, it's the second you're comfortable, the moment for us we have a choice to not go forward, to not push ourselves or push our team or push the ability to get beyond our team, it doesn't seem to work. And we've done it both with nothing, with a little bit, and with a lot. And the best work that we've done is come from that stage where we have a little bit to move forward and enough to engage a broader conversation and do a bit of homework. But no, there's definitely a hungry, sweaty, focused on going forward requirement, I think, to do it. I don't think resources is the key, not the innovation side of it. Maybe as things mature and to execute and to practice, but it's amazing how much potential is out there that requires relatively little, provided you're not saying, except for the resource of time.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I mean, you're an entrepreneur yourself. How do you stay uncomfortable? If entrepreneurs by definition exist in a world of discomfort, how do you stay just uncomfortable enough?
Work with VCs? No. Sorry, guys. No. That just cost me a lot. What we're working on now is, well, one of the things we do is we're surrounding ourselves. We're almost in our second generation of this. I mean, I started as one age group, and I became another age group when I woke up one day. And we're making ourselves uncomfortable by hiring and engaging with people who make us uncomfortable. And providing a lot of empowerment to people. Right now, we're actually finding incredible energy and idea generation coming out of people who are coming right out of school. What's really interesting is, so feel good about this, those of you who are students. Right now, the group of students who are coming out, both undergraduate and graduate, we're finding incredibly creative and thoughtful, and both patient and impatient in a right way. And as opposed to the students from about 4 or 5 years ago, we're seeing a big difference. And so what we're trying to do is actually engage that energy, not to be the junior staff in our process, but to bring them forward in some leadership roles, or at least at certain times to bring forward in leadership things to bring us forward in terms of ideas and maybe or maybe not the technology, because that takes a little bit more experience, but very much market read, sort of the BS check, as well as where do they think things are going, because much more focused on where we're going to be 10 and 20 years or 30 years from now than some other folks. So we find that by people can make you uncomfortable or make you create a restless environment that allows you to go forward.
I think this whole issue of discomfort is really an interesting one. One of the most counterintuitive things that I think for us when we were doing some of this original research was the idea that you could give managers too many resources, right? Mm-hmm. And in this day of resource constraints and everyone struggling with budgets and downsizing, it's hard to imagine, but what large organizations tend to do is they give managers just enough resources to protect them from their own customers, right? So I have just enough resources that I can sit in a conference room someplace and I can dream up these business ideas and I can do, Excel spreadsheets and pro formas and all this kind of stuff. And in fact, the people I'm not protected from are the people in my own organization. So the other people in that conference with me are hammering me for, prove to me this is a good idea, tell us why we should give you, all this kind of stuff, and it leads to this gridlock. when the people that we don't want to protect people from are customers. And entrepreneurs are not protected from their customers, right? I mean, the number one issue is, where's that dollar of revenue, right? And the discipline of that intense kind of drive to produce those dollars of revenue early in a process is, in fact, the most effective way to manage the risk of any new business idea, right? Because we know most new business ideas fail, not because we can't execute, but because they don't create the value for the target customer that we think they'll create. So the sooner you can get out there and fail with your customer, as opposed to fail in the conference room when the CFO won't let you do what you'd like to ask permission to do, the better. And so part of this kind of crazy challenge we have in getting people more entrepreneurially in large organizations is how do you shove them out there so that they aren't protected from the customer, so the customer does have to indicate really serious interest early on, right? And still protect them from the other people in the organization who don't even want to let them try, right?
What's interesting about this to me is that it sounds like you're talking about rather deliberate choices that, even whether it's in large organizations or smaller ones, that need to be made to encourage an innovation to occur or to encourage entrepreneurial behaviors. And you mentioned the word structure earlier as well. When I think of innovation, I think often of that Gary Larson cartoon where it's two scientists, they're writing at the chalkboard. There's a massive equations and numbers, and then there's a cloud in the middle with a miracle happens, and then the answer. It's the miracle happens part that always seems to be what innovation is about, at least to the layperson. But you talk about structure. What's going on there?
Well,
and how do you do it?
Okay, one caveat.
Yeah.
I'm from California, so our sort of structure may be a little bit different. It's all relative, so.
We're at Jefferson's University. We know about structure.
But it's a process. I mean, it's about the success. I mean, we see it as the ability to affect change. So it's not the idea unto itself. Well, not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's the ability for the idea to become something that can affect change or can affect a result. And so that is, as probably a lot of you are involved in, is a process and takes lots of elements, and there's tremendous hurdles in your way to do that. And so a lot of what we're doing is both trying to generate conversation and dialogue, as well as to incubate and mature those ideas into something that can effectuate change. Mm-hmm. So what does that mean in terms of structure? We do things like, we don't make this a Friday afternoon. For us, innovation isn't a thing we do Friday at 5. We do have a thing that is Tuesday at 4, but it's...
Let me write that down,
Tuesday at 4.
Yeah.
But it's a big deal, it's not Friday. But what we do is we have what I said, it's in everything we do. It's a mantra of the company. But what I mean provide a structure is that we make time for it to happen, number one. Two, we actually have, those of you who have been involved in magazines or newspapers, they have the editorial meeting. We have our sort of our staff ideas forum. It's almost like an editorial type function. That's our Tuesday at 4, where we get together and we work through we have an ideas pipeline. Mm-hmm. And so we work through our pipeline and we look at what's sticking, we look what's happening in the news, we look at where we think trends are going, where we think what's going to be sticking, what's meaningful for us. And we both generate topics of conversation as well as assign people to work on things going forward, as well as look at ideas that have matured and things that we want to progress and that we need to go out and get some resources for, and move that through a pipeline, and elements get put to the side. So we actually have structure, we have that structured process. And the other part is, to repeat it, is that as a company, it is one of the things that we do. Most companies spend more on sort of their HR person than probably their innovation person. For us, it's part of people's jobs to come prepared with things that they're thinking about that relate to our core values, which we try to put into what we call the issues of the day and the issues of tomorrow. And that's sort of the way we get about it. And then, the cloud, sometimes it is a whoa, but it's usually a series of, for us, I think it's probably more a series of conversations. And it's getting people engaged in activities and events and places and outside that desk, so that what the structure does is it gives the base for things to happen. And so we get together, structure it, and then send people away, and then have them come back. And then for me, some of it comes out of me, but what we're really trying to do is get it to come out of the gang. And you have to support people and have them feel like it's okay to fail. And you've got, like I said, going back to the young people, or newer employees, young or old, they're afraid too. They just got a job. It's hard to get jobs these days, and it's hard to get jobs with us. And people are afraid. It's like, oh, am I going to make a mistake? And you have to encourage them to fail as well with us. And so that's what I mean called the structure. We have to think about it. We have to resist our urge to be like, that's a stupid idea. That urge to step on someone when something it's not your idea, or you don't think it's going to work. You have to allow them to be comfortable and confident to bring it forward, as well as critical. But also, at the same time, I'm called critical, not unforgiving, but critical thinking. I was talking with Mike yesterday. We were talking about the role of the critique. I'm an architect by background and training, and if any of you have ever gone through that process or had friends who've gone through architecture school, we were trained. We pin stuff up twice a week in front of a group like this and get ripped to shreds. And to do that became sort of a useful mantra. We do that from an intellectual and an ideas point of view now, is let people put it up. We play down the ripping them to shreds aspect, but we get people to stand up, defend their idea, push them to see their depth of their belief.
Now, I'm sorry. Oh, sorry about that. Please, go ahead.
Hi, you guys talked about lack of resource or enough resource for generating innovation. Can you take that step forward and say it is not only resource crunched, but also the fact that customers may not have enough cash to pay you for the things that you're developing? So can you touch upon frugal innovation, where you develop something that your customers can pay and it is good enough for them to pay, but it is also applicable in societies where customers can pay a lot more than that?
Do you want to take
No, you're really the expert in that one.
on having no cash?
Yep.
Well, I think there's a couple parts, if I got the question right, is how do we stimulate and generate ideas when we're really resource constrained? Is that right? And then how do we bring it to the marketplace to get remunerated, or how do we push it forward when the marketplace isn't there yet? Did I get that right?
How do you push forward that in a market that may not have enough cash that we see? So an example might be, if you look at, I do electricity in India, if you look at smart meters in the US, the cost is $90 a piece. We cannot push that in the Indian market because we cannot pay more than $3 a piece.
Right.
How do you bring that down?
Well, then you're a little bit into the product and market side. Let me deal with the first part, and then I'll try to do a second. Maybe Jeanne will pick up on that as well. I can talk about it from some of my experience. We have our own particular brand. I mean, to some extent, there's probably two parts to that. One, because we are incubating companies, and so we are doing things that are very cash constrained. And a lot of it we find is just being honest. Honest with our team. This isn't a funded thing. We need to get somewhere. We try to be very frank about that. But in fairness, the reciprocal part is, having said that, because we've had some success generating companies and generating ideas, but not so much that we're actually still have to do this for a living, not that I know how to do anything else, I think. But that being honest with the team and getting to part of the process. So we talk about where we are financially. We're very transparent about where we are financially. And there's other things that you can do. We do things with equity. We do things with deferred compensation. We do things with supporting sort of a construct where there's jobs created doing other types of activities, so that we can enable this to happen, but we don't make it the side activity. It's a combination of things. What MK Think, the reason we've set MK Think up originally and have really been advancing it, particularly recently since I returned after creating Project Frog, is that we've tried to create a company that day to day and month to month works as a viable company. And we have a range of things that we do. So we do consulting work, we do design work for folks, we do innovation for hire on certain things that we're helping companies advance, some things that they're looking at or marketplaces that they want to get into. We do that, as well as do things that are of our own accord, which are usually ahead of the market, where we think the market is going, which means it has a longer pipeline to get cash. And so our team does both. as opposed to saying, okay, you guys get to do the non-funded projects, and you guys are the folks who are the consultant team, and you're going to support those. It's the same folks. And so that's taken us 10 years to get to a stable point in this economy. We're doing okay with it, and that's one of the ways we get at it. Now, taking that forward, it's a very, very difficult decision and process. I mean, the talk before, those guys were great. I mean, to get in, you have to, there's a judgment call. There is money out there. There's, you know, it's as tough as things might seem. I'm still amazed that certain things get funded in the first place. And if those can get funded, there's certainly reasons that other things can get funded. I mean, there is money there on the sidelines. There's ways to do it. But it's a very different stage of the process and has very different implications. And so the bigger challenge for us is, do we want to go down that investment cycle, and are we prepared mentally to have the company or the idea go through the changes that are going to happen? They're not necessarily bad, they're just different, and you have to be mentally and emotionally prepared for that. And so, and sometimes we do that early on. We think about that early on we always think about what we're going to do. Sometimes we defer that decision, and we're in a couple of those right now. In terms of the marketplace, that's the role. You know, to be truly, I mean, for us to be in the innovation space, you have to be ahead of the market. If you're innovating for today's market or yesterday's markets, whether it's the meter or you have to be comfortable dealing with a world that does not exist yet. Right? If you're really truly in the innovation space, they may be today's problems, but you have to guess or anticipate or research and make a bet on where the market is going to be and go there. And if you can't be committed to that, then it's a very, very tough process. But if you do it and you get it right, you know, 1 out of every 4 or 5 times it's going to work.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that we know is that sometimes the most powerful impediments to innovation are actually in our own heads. They're not in the marketplace. There's the extent to which, as business people, we're incredibly solution driven, right? I mean, we want the answer up front, and then we want to drive that answer into the marketplace, right? We want people to fund our answer, and we want customers to buy our answer, right? And the reality of it is, if you start with a $3 meter, right, and meters cost $20 today, you're probably not going to get very far with that, right? In the absence of a real technological breakthrough, right? But the issue we find is often to help people back up to say, really, but is it a $3 meter that I really need, right? I mean, what's the job to be done? And I think all of this work around really developing a deep understanding of the job that whoever you're trying to create value for is trying to do. I mean, our answer is the meter, but there's probably a lot more opportunity in figuring out how to deliver a solution of some kind to their job for $3 than how to create the $3 meter. And in fact, you know, there's a whole toolkit around that. And I mean, when I think of structure and innovation, I think of tools, not rules. Right? And if you look at the toolkit that a lot of the design consulting firms like IDEO have really done wonderful things with, it's a toolkit for really developing a deep understanding of what are a customer's unarticulated needs. Yeah. Right? And I mean, I think this goes back to your point, right? If you wait for someone to tell you what they need, chances are there's not a lot of competitive advantage and a lot of real profitability in that. Right? We've got to figure out what people need that they aren't able to tell us about. And so how we kind of get inside the heads of the people we're trying to create value for and really understand what the needs are they can't tell us about, and then bring our innovative abilities to thinking about how we could take our capability set to deliver that to me is what really unlocks a tremendous amount of innovation. And innovation that is data-driven. I think there's this other notion that innovation, you know, the reason why the front end's fuzzy is because these magical ideas like your cartoon just pop out. The reality of it is, you know, once you maybe put technological innovation to the side, which is a world that I don't know much about, most of the rest of innovation, the kind of innovation we call business model innovation, the clues to the really exciting innovation possibilities are already there in today's behaviors. If you get to know the customer well enough, the clues to figure out how to create a better value proposition to help them do whatever it is they're trying to do. They're already there. We're just not trained to look for them often, and we're not trained to really understand them deeply. So I think that's where we begin, right? Stepping away from that focus on our product or our solution and investing the time to really, in a kind of an open-minded way, just really understand what's the job, and not the job related to our product, but the whole job, right, that somebody's trying to get done, and where we have the ability to create value for them, even if it hasn't occurred to them that we've got the ability to help them here, to go in and help them get that job done. And if $3 is what they can spend, then how do we help them get it done for $3? Right?
In advance of this conversation yesterday, we talked about the notion of listening to the customer, because I'm hearing a little bit of that in what you're saying and collecting data around that. How important is it to listen to the customer?
I actually think observing the customers often, we've talked about this. We spent a lot of time yesterday trying to find something we disagreed with each other about so we could do like a point-counterpoint thing. Well, we couldn't find anything. But we were discussing this. We're back to the problem of when you ask the customer what they want and you give them what they want, there's a bunch of bad stuff associated with that, right? I mean, you're playing a Me Too game. The customer tends to ask for stuff that, for instance, it turns into mass customization, and you're doing one-offs for every customer, and then you're not really making any money, right? So the question is, really, the trick is, how do you figure out what they want by observing them living their lives and getting their job done? And to me, this is really where the whole set of new tools around ethnography and all really come in, because we're studying the customer doing the job in their native habitat. And if you look at somebody like Xerox, they've had staff ethnographers for 30 years, because what they learned early on was when we told them what happened when the copier jammed, we were either lying or totally oblivious to what we really were doing, right? And so they had to actually watch what happened in order to figure out how to keep it from happening again. They couldn't rely on what we told them. And to me, that's a message that has not been really exploited by business people yet. And that's the observing, and it's a listening, but it's not listening about tell me what you want. It's listening about tell me what gets in the way of accomplishing what you need to accomplish in order to make money in your business, in order for you to be successful in your business. That's the conversation we want to be having with customers.
Oh, yes. Sorry.
Hi there. I teach strategy and communications at VCU, but I have an operations background, so I love metrics. Mm-hmm. And I love this idea of defining the innovation pipeline, because it is fuzzy. And so I'm interested in what kind of categories or distinctions or meaningful ways of seeing an idea, experiencing an idea, if you will. If you're in California, you might feel the idea, and making some sort of judgment about, is it, I had to throw something in there, right? But, I heard you make some distinctions. Okay, this is an idea for today versus an idea for tomorrow. This is an idea that needs resources so we can explore it better, versus this is an idea that we're just going to sideline for now because it doesn't make sense. But I'm interested in what other sorts of distinctions, metrics, categories that are useful for defining, acting upon, making decisions. I mean, we have the fund, no fund, et cetera. Because it seems to me this kind of metric-driven feedback loop to make sense of that fuzziness might be useful in a lot of different settings, in a small consultancy that's getting together 3 times a week, or also in a larger sense in these more macro environments. So.
Yeah, I said organized, I didn't say defined. That's even beyond what I can do. But no, it's, well, I want to actually parse the language a little bit. I want to answer your question and pick up what Jeanne was talking about, is that we talk about ideas and we talk about innovation. It's in a context, and if I back it up all the way to where we start is what's the problem we're trying to solve? So I'm going back to this gentleman's question of, it's the problem that the meter, it's the problem that the meter costs $3, but we know it needs to be the meter, or getting back to the customer, what's the ultimate problem we're trying to solve? Is it energy use? Is it we just don't know what energy we're trying to use? Is it that we know but we can't affect the change, right? So we actually begin much more with what's the problem we're trying to solve. And that's a key shift, and it can happen from a consulting platform, it can happen from an entrepreneurial platform, it can happen in a large organization, but focusing on the problem. So putting that in context of a process, for us, we actually do have a 6-step process that we've kind of stumbled around to get to, and we begin with what we call discovery. We actually have a formal process that we work internally with, we've been hired to do, and we call it discovery. And discovery is trying to understand what the problem that we're trying to solve is. And it's great that you talk about data. I didn't think I'd end that way, but now I am a data guy. And we are all about trying to understand, measure, and monitor what's happening. Because what we've been finding is when we've observed what people do, customers do, or marketplace does versus what they say they do, they are very, very different.
Can you give an example, a brief example of that sort of thing?
Goodness. Like many, many examples. Let me try to be concise. One we can all relate to, offices. We do a lot with academic facilities and corporate facilities that pertain to organizations are always contacting us about how do we create a more innovative space or collaborative space and do it in a sort of on our consulting analytics side, right? And so we go in and we used to interview a lot, and they would come in, can you run an interview process for us and stimulate conversation and this and that? And we would do it and we present the results, and as Jeanne was saying, the results were we knew what people said that they wanted. And so we go through collaboration and this and that, and then we would define and said, okay, therefore we need 5 times as many collaboration rooms or whatever. And but they would say the most important thing I have is still my office. And we would then go in and evaluate where these classrooms. We would then go and evaluate what's actually being used. And you find that people say, well, I'm in my office and this is what I do. I do this activity. I'm working by myself, and I have teams of 3 or 4 people that meet with me on a regular basis, and therefore this element needs to be defined this way. And if you can add more budget and do more things, we will then build these other spaces or do these other things. We go back in and actually evaluate and measure, monitor what actually people do, and we correlate it to where their effectiveness comes from based on customers' interpretation of where they're productive. We find that the most productive work happens very differently where people perceive them to happen. So if you ask an individual, they say, okay, 70 or 80% of my time I'm in my office, and 50% of the time I'm working with somebody else, and 10% of my time I'm in, or 20% of my time I'm in meetings, and 5% of my time I'm in team activities. And if you unbundled, first of all, we find we actually measure it. People spend somewhere in the order of magnitude of 10, well, it depends on the organization, sometimes as little as 10 to 20% of their time in that personal space. And they may spend 20 to 40% of their time actually working with other people. And of that, the effectiveness happens to be happening here, there, or wherever. And we find that they're entirely misaligned with, and these are people who are very sincerely trying to report out what they're doing. And we find that what they actually do and what they're reporting that they do are not even slightly off, they're incredibly off. Mm-hmm. And going back to the cash question, we find that in creating that alignment frees up tremendous amounts of resources to enable these institutions to think differently about how they want to work and creates budgets for them to do different things. Now we're working on tools that allow that to happen more in the hands of customers, which is one of the things that we're trying to work on, but you hit it. But if I were just to break down, because I think you want a specific question to the 6-stage Mark Miller process but we do discovery. And so I'll do this quickly, and it's a really important thing. We allow it to have time, and we allow it to have resources, and it's a meaningful, specific thing, which is we collect data. We do interview, because interviewing, it's not exactly what people are saying to help us answer the question. We really have to understand where people's realities are, to allow them to just be open to things that are going to be brought forward to them. So we interview, we research, we analyze what is going on. We do all sorts of metric analysis, and we force ourselves to not have a preconception. That is discovery, and we just bring that back to, if we're the customer ourselves, if it's to a customer, it's external to them, that's discovery. We then move to what we call assessment, which is really trying to pull together, to correlate, to look at things in different frameworks against each other. We juxtapose a lot of non-traditional ways of looking at things. We do a lot against behavior and environment, behavior and assets, and all sorts of some other things. And we see what that tells us, and what findings come out of that. Still trying to be open about it, but to findings. And the third thing is then we move into strategy. We move into strategy, and which starts to get into a world where maybe people are more familiar and gets to more corporate, but whereby you start to think about, okay, what are the scenarios? What are the various options that are here? What are the pros and cons? How do we put that into scenarios, future forward scenarios, based on various factors that could happen or couldn't happen, whether it's in the economy, whether it's in the environment, whether it's in just time. Stuff happens. And if you look at many companies that are successful, they didn't get there in a very linear way. And so we scenario plan. And then we move forward through design. But we have a very important step, which we call the prototyping and testing. And once again, whether it's for us or for folks we work with, we absolutely insist on having a defined prototype and test stage. And to get people around that we are going to do something, and it might be a little more expensive the way you're used to pricing something, that on an order of magnitude scale, it is the most critical, valuable thing we probably do outside of discovery, which is we allow the prototype to happen, we make it happen, we allow it to be beat up, whatever the thing that we're creating is, and take that and rigorously put it back through the process before we can begin to implement. And I think, so we do have a method.
But I mean, let me just address that, because I think this question of metrics is so important. Metrics is the holy grail in innovation.
Yeah.
I mean, what we know about the metrics we've got is that they don't work. Return on investment, payback, those are bad metrics. If only we had good ones. Because again, we know with business people, you cannot take their metrics away. Right? It's like our blankies, right? Don't take our metrics. You can take a lot of other stuff, but not the metrics. And so I think that's compounded by the fact, though, that our metrics that we're taught to think of as metrics are primarily financial. So it is ROI, it is revenues, it is profitability, and those are all outcome metrics. Those are not helpful. They let you know that your innovation either is or isn't working. They don't tell you why it didn't work. They don't tell you how to make it better, right? So when we back up into what are the kinds of metrics, basically where we start is that every new idea is a hypothesis. Right? We just start there. So what we need to do is use classical kind of hypothesis testing methodologies. And the question becomes, what are the conditions that a new business idea has to be able to fulfill in order for it to be a good business? Well, this is where business not being rocket science is really helpful. It has to create value for customers. We have to be able to execute it. We have to be able to defend it against competitors. Eventually, we have to be able to scale it. And every hypothesis has a set of assumptions about why any given business idea creates value, is executable, scalable, and defensible. Right? And in the beginning, if we can just get clarity on those assumptions, we can test those assumptions. Now, we're into behavioral tests, like Mark is talking about. Right? Early on, almost all the important assumptions are customer value assumptions. So we're really having to measure and monitor whether the customer, when they're exposed to our product, is actually behaving in the ways that we've based this hypothesis on them behaving. And if they're behaving in different ways, we need to adjust our hypothesis, which means change our business idea. But this whole idea of backing away, stop looking for the financial metrics early on, get serious about being in a hypothesis testing process, and really develop our skills to understand what are the assumptions that we've got baked into this idea about why they're successful, and how do we get good data to test them. That to me is about as close as we can get to the holy grail, at least so far that we've been able to figure out.
You have a question?
Yes. Hi, Mark. In speaking with a lot of entrepreneurs, their ideas come from pain points that exist already, and their ideas are around how to make that better. And while it's true that your companies have been around pain points that you felt you could do better as an architect and designer, I was really surprised this summer in working with you by the amount of research and publications and patents and the formal academic approach you take to the way that you look into new opportunities. So can you talk about the translation of the research into picking a commercially viable opportunity to create a business?
Stephanie knows how ADD I actually am. It's true. I mean, part of what I say, do I practice what I preach? Sometimes, which is probably part of the key to what we do. We research and write all the time, and we're trying to do more and more of it. That's why I like, frankly, coming to see you here is probably more valuable, or is super valuable for me. and maybe more valuable than it is even for you, because it gets me thinking, it gets me into an environment of questioning and answering that gets outside of my structured environment. So, and out of that, I mean, if I pick up on what you're asking, Stephanie, it's that we look at what are the issues of the day, what are the problems of the day, and where are they going. And we've become, from a work point of view, very apolitical, because what we're trying to do is there's so much noise, especially now. There's so much noise and opinion forming that happens very, very fast, and it becomes the dialogue that you get surrounded by. Read the paper, or who reads paper anymore? You know, online, whatever you get your information source from. And we work very hard to try to get beyond that, to look at what's going on numerically, look at trend, look at what people actually do versus what they say, and try to use that as a basis for, yes, what we care about. We are driven a lot by what we care about and what we're interested in, but as a basis to go forward. So I guess if I pick up on what you're saying, Stephanie, yeah, we've shifted from, Project Frog, which I think we might talk a little bit about this afternoon. We started as a design firm, moved to ideas and innovation platform, created a company that's essentially a hardware company, Project Frog, and now we're working on creating a software company, which is really a platform-based company that is driven from analytics and metrics, and actually trying to do a lot around called the soft science of human behavior as a tool to making decisions. And that just comes out of our sort of experience of just people make decisions very differently than you expect. And to put that into a toolkit that can be done at a large scale is something that we are trying to investigate. So I think that stuff is probably what I pick up on. I know I'm vague, but I can't entirely talk about that company.
We've actually run out of time.
Oh, okay.
All right. Well, thank you both very much.
Thank you.
It's very enjoyable talking to you, and thank you all. I think we're taking a break right now. Yeah.